Perfect. Thank you very much. You've also managed to cover the first part of my notes here with our introduction, so we can skip straight beyond that. But as we have a slide anyway, who are we? So we've been introduced, but the main thing is that at Intento, what we're doing is we're helping these global companies not just understand and use this technology, but start to build it together in these workflows. And this is what we've been doing with Ben and the team at Amadeus. It's not just about being able to access this technology. Accessibility is becoming easier and easier. It's about being able to actually deploy them in a way where they can work together. The conversation is not about which is necessarily best. It's about how they can work best together, and that's what we specialize in. And as has already been introduced, I'm joined by Benjamin Warren at Amadeus. He's been there for around about 10 years. And writing, editing, and localization, which includes machine translation, is under Ben's team. And that's what we've been working on primarily in the years that we've been working together. And that's all about providing this consistent and harmonized language experience to their customers and to their stakeholders and other people at Amadeus. So, first of all, quick disclaimer. This is more about what we will and won't go through today. We only have a short amount of time. We're really going to focus today on business priorities, looking at why Gen AI is important to Amadeus, what worked, what didn't work in our projects, and what were the business outcomes for Ben and for the wider team. Now, this does mean that we won't go really deep on some of the finer technical details, and we won't go into kind of a deep dive of the methodology, the technical analysis, all of these sorts of things. But don't worry, if that's something that does interest you, you can catch us around at the event and we'll be happy to answer to the best of our abilities. And if that isn't enough, then we'll also be able to connect you with some of the experts at Intento who are actually involved in the project execution. So let's get started then. So we're going to start out hearing from Ben on what the AI status quo was at Amadeus, why Gen AI was important to them and to the wider team, and then we'll look a little bit closer at the projects that we ran and finish up with what's coming next. So Ben, let me hand over to you.
Thank you. Firstly, for those who don't know Amadeus, we're one of those global multi-billion-pound secret companies that no one's ever heard of. Luckily, we're not one of those ones that rule the world. We're just one of those ones that help to run it. So anybody who came by a plane, went through an airport, or booked into a hotel, or hired a car, or anything like that, and you had a beautiful, seamless travel experience, that was us. If it was awful, that was our competitors. So that's the world in which I work. Now, like all large companies, localization was an afterthought, especially for a company of our size that just grew and grew and grew over the years into something of a beast. I think a lot of people genuinely believe that things turn into other languages just by magic. And that has never really been an attitude that has helped the company in the longer terms. So we launched the Language and Translation Office to try and solve that a little bit. Our initial goal was we wanted to launch our learning services in multiple languages so it could be a self-service tool for our customers. We could then use that technology to digitalize our support flow. That was where we started from. The pandemic then hit, and what was a nice idea to see if in practice it would work suddenly became, right now we're doing this, we have to do this, we have no choice, this has to happen, and it has to happen tomorrow. Luckily, we had already started our conversations with Intento, and we'd begun by testing and training all the different MT engines we'd had. We'd learned about these things, neural networks and AI and transformers, and all sounded terribly exciting, and we didn't have a clue what was going on. But we did find out that it was going to take us more than 11 different providers to meet all of our language needs. At one point, we were going up to 60 different languages. And we started building customized workflows with Intento to put that into practice. At the same time, we started working on all the different TMSs to see which one works best for us. And I think as Peter was saying earlier, when they start to work with those companies and know nothing about localization. Yeah, that was us. What we found with memoQ in particular was, and take a deep breath, we are working with non-linguists as reviewers. We don't really have a choice. They're the subject matter experts, but they're not linguists. And after all the tests that we had, memoQ, by far and away, was the best and easiest tool to bring them on board so they could understand what their job was, what we wanted from them, and they could actually implement it. So, well done. You created something that worked for us. We then went from a couple of 100,000 words a year to 17 million words in our first year, and that's just kept growing ever since. It's a fairly traditional workflow. We have source material, it's translated, translation memories, terminology, glossaries. It's then reviewed, goes into sanity check, gets pushed out. We also then introduced instant translation using all this technology to help communicate with our customers, so all of the linguistic work we do gets fed back into that automatically. Now, what was a problem really was we became a victim of our own success a little bit. All these other departments wanted a bit of what we were doing, and to be honest, while the technology could cope, we couldn't. We're a very small team, and the amount of work out there within the company was just too much. We also know that these skilled resources around the rest of the company don't exist. So if we couldn't do it, nobody else was going to be able to. That meant, in turn, there wasn't enough data to then train machine translation engines or any other kind of technology to be able to do things automatically. So we'd really reached the limit of what we could achieve in the setup that we had. Then one of our directors or VPs says, oh, there's Gen AI, and it's great because it does writing and editing and translation and everything. And as the person in charge of writing and translating and editing and everything, we thought, we know. We'll take a look at this and we'll let you know how it works. And this was really the first lesson. When we launched machine translation, we didn't push the technology or the way we talk about the technology enough. We didn't really mention it as an AI breakthrough. We didn't talk about transformers at all, as far as I remember. And that led to the impression that as localization, we were somehow behind the curve from the rest of the developers working on A. Whereas I actually think the opposite is true. The localization industry seems to me to be way ahead in terms of these technologies and tools than most other domains. But that's not the impression people outside of localization 24/7 get. So it becomes a battle within a company like ours to get that story across. And that's really what this was about. We had to try and then control the narrative. We had to make sure that if these decisions were being made, they were the right decisions when it came to language. And if they weren't the right decisions, at least we could influence them and push people in the right direction. Now, we are, first and foremost, a technology company. So almost overnight, we had between 90, 100 different Gen AI projects going on simultaneously for every use case you could possibly think of. What we wanted to show was when it came to language, when it came to quality, they needed to be thinking the way we think and to come through us. Just because this Gen AI could do something doesn't mean it should do something. And if it does do something, they want to be talking with us when it has an impact on our world. So we got ahead of this narrative a little bit. We didn't want to lose that momentum that we'd seen with machine translation. And also there was a little bit of an excitement because it's like, well, maybe this is good. Maybe this could help fill some of those gaps we've identified. Maybe it's a tool that will be useful. So by setting that agenda, keeping quality as what people needed to think of when they think about these tools, we were able to start to have those conversations with all these other development teams around the company. And also we just like playing with new toys. You know, maybe they're useful. Who knows? So it then becomes a battle between teams like mine who are interested in quality versus everybody else in the company who just wants something faster. So it's, I just want more of it. And you say, well, what's it? It doesn't matter what it is. I want more of it, and I want it faster. That kind of makes it difficult for language departments because, you know, our goal is to make everything beautiful. That's what we want to do. So there's the constant battle between that business reality of what's being asked and what we can deliver. So we started collecting all our linguistic assets. We used those to train the large language models with Intento rather than using anything generic. And more importantly, we started publicizing this work throughout the company. So people would start to link what we did with what the outcomes would be. It also meant we could tell that story and benefit from those existing workflows rather than anything else. So,
So at Intento, we're lucky enough to work with a big number of global enterprises, and therefore the things that Ben was telling us and what we were hearing from Amadeus, we'd heard before. We'd heard that these sorts of problems that were problems they were faced with, and that they needed to find a solution, or at least a way to approach it. So we felt we were kind of well placed to be able to help Ben and the team deal with kind of this new world of generative AI that was presented to us only a few years ago. So we've been working with transformer technology for a few years, but when ChatGPT blew up the internet or took over the world, wherever you were viewing it from, we started to be asked by clients, what should we do with this, or should we use this? What is it that's happening here? And of course, this wasn't just the context that we had at these organizations. These organizations are huge, and therefore there was hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who were speaking to other organizations or advisors and looking at how this could shape their potential future setup. So as a result, we decided to focus on how it could enhance localization workflows. And we were led by how our clients could see the biggest impact, not just going with maybe what was trendy or what was being spoken about at the time, but actually somewhere that we could get some return on investment and see some impact in the production workflow. So whilst we do some work with our clients on content creation, culture adaptation, and even automatic transcreation, we really spent most of our time focusing on enhancing the workflow that already existed in our language hub. And this was to focus on source quality improvement and automatic post-editing. The language hub already allowed us to kind of chain together these different NLP steps around machine translation, things like vendor-agnostic glossaries, tone of voice in the text, and things like that. But we needed to do some hypothesis testing on what our clients wanted this generative AI to do. So in order to do this, we started piloting various approaches with a range of different Gen AI models. So that was mainly OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and Anthropic. And we followed a series of steps to understand if the state of the art in this technology could actually achieve what our clients wanted it to. And that's a very important bridge. Just because, in this case, Ben and his team wanted to do something, and just because someone may have written on LinkedIn that it can do something, there's a technical bridge there we need to test and see if it will work. Now, thankfully, we've been undertaking evaluation of machine translation models since 2016, so the internal infrastructure was already in place for us. So with some changes in process and some upskilling of pre-existing team, we were able to quickly start helping customers find out what was best for them and best for their use case. Of course, finding the best model in pilot mode is one thing, but actually being able to put it into production is extremely important. And here, this is where we could lean on our pre-existing TMS integrations for machine translation, such as the one that we have with memoQ, to enable customers to quickly use this technology. We could build on the work that we've done with machine translation and enhance that with the latest Gen AI technology. So these integrations would then allow for source quality improvement and automatic post-editing, but this time powered by generative AI, to be built around the translation models. And most importantly, it didn't require any custom development on either side, and it didn't change any of the user workflow for those people that were already using memoQ. So when we started talking about this with Ben and the team a year ago, it was this approach that we took to solving this challenge. Ben.
Thank you. I'd better speed up. Based on what we'd said with Intento, based on what we knew the industry was doing, what we knew we wanted, we started to do the obvious things. We worked on source quality improvement and automatic post-editing. The source quality improvement was really to see, could we fill those gaps? We are under-resourced in that area, and there's an awful amount of text that we just never get to see. Could we create something that would help solve a problem there? Our editor's feedback was that a lot of changes that she deals with are very, very repetitive. The writer's just not learning time and time again. So maybe we could do something there, and we could add more value by letting her work on things that needed more skilled work. For APE, it was all about our language strategy. Where was the value in which languages? This was something that we hadn't thought of in quite the same way before, and this gave me an excuse to introduce that concept. We have limited resources across different languages, and where should we best use them? Also, where would it best benefit our company commercially in terms of time to market, in terms of speaking to customers and winning new contracts and so on. So these were all of the core things that we wanted to start to look at and put into practice with Intento. So if we move to SQI, the goal was to create edited text, to have our robo-editor, as we were calling it then, to free up those resources, fill those gaps. We created our style guides. We had them already. We had grammar rules. We had tone of voice, branding rules. We took all our content files before and after editing, PDFs, PPTs, everything we could find, and we used them all to train the LLM. And basically, it didn't work. It was all just too complex. There was too much information. So trying to decide what was important was becoming impossible. We had an 84-page style guide, which we managed to get down to 8 pages, which means I now question what's in the other 70-odd, but I'll worry about that another time. And we focused on just those common recurring issues that we were seeing time and time again. But it was still relying on that human context. It was still relying on what was in our editor's head as what she knew was right and wrong. Also, our source files, our editing process is very manual, and that wasn't working. The chunking became huge, the prompts became massive, and the output became unreliable. So the result was, well, it didn't work, didn't follow our rules. There was a very small difference. Intento's linguists kindly said that our quality was very high to begin with, which was lovely. I told everybody that, but it didn't really help. Also, we saw how we trained the large language model made a difference. I'll explain a bit more in a mo. But it was all just too domain specific. It just wasn't replicating that human knowledge enough. But this wasn't a failure, because what this did was I could take these results and I could go to the other teams and show them the complexity of quality in language. We could show, scientifically, in their eyes, what we had done, why it didn't work, what we could do to make it work. And that allowed us to keep control of that story and to make them think about quality. So we didn't have this robo-editor, so what we pivoted to instead was a writing aid. Can we improve the skills of our writers in a way? And that's what we're working on now as a new approach. For APE, well, this was based on our language strategy. We were putting the same effort into every language, and this was a little bit crazy because what we then discovered was really 8 languages are reaching 90% of our customer base. But if we're working in 20 languages, sometimes up to 60 languages, and we're putting the same effort in, we're not getting that value back as a company for the amount of work and resources that we're using, essentially. Now, I still want to be able to serve all those customers, but I need to show that where we put effort into those languages, value is returned, and where we're not putting more effort in, where we're not getting that value back. And I know that sort of translators and people will be screaming at this, but this is kind of the business reality of being an in-house localization department like mine. We're never asked, just make it better, take your time, doesn't matter how much it costs, just, get on with it. We're always asked, how can you do more with less? Fewer resources, less budget, just do it all. And we get very good at taking deep breaths. It's all very calm in our place nowadays. Anyway, with API and SQI, we had the same logic. We did them at the same time. We trained with the same rules. We used Spanish as our pilot language because it's the second biggest language we use. And also, we'd had a battle between our Spanish colleagues and our South American colleagues as to who was actually speaking correctly. So in order to solve this, we had to have an entire internal project to get everybody to agree on Spanish. That meant we had a lot of linguistic assets that everyone agreed with, which was good. And also, one of the members of my team is a Spanish linguist, so it just really made sense. And then we had success. The linguistic scoring we got was only a tiny increase. But when we delved into it with our reviewers, we saw a massive difference. The quality was much higher. The voice was better. The style was better. Terminology was being used much better. These targeted changes, we came down to 70% fewer segments were needed to be reviewed, which was a massive leap. Now, I told our people, it was only 50% because, again, I need to manage expectation. I don't want them to suddenly think 70%, that's close to 90%. You only need to do this much. No, I want them to go the other way. So we toned it down a little bit, but 50% is still a massive number in their eyes. And why the big difference between English and Spanish? One of the main things, beyond the complexity, was all of our Spanish assets go through memoQ. Everything is segmented. We have translation memories. It's a traditional localization workflow. English is a bit more all over the place. And this made us realize we could change the way we work with English. We can bring it into memoQ. We can start to use different tools. And I can use that as a reason to make some change management, to bring all these other departments along that need to make this change with us. I now have the stats and the figures to back that all up. So the storytelling, I think, is really important. Gen AI can make a difference so long as you're using it with the correct strategy, with the correct tools, and you're very honest about what it can achieve and what it can't achieve. Day to day, we're going to start to move editing into a different process. We're going to bring editing into memoQ. I haven't quite worked out how yet, but that's what our next step is going to be. I can use this as a story around the company to make those changes. And then finally, what we want to put on, which is pleasingly similar to what we saw earlier in Jay's slide, is to have an end-to-end workflow that incorporates generative AI to do those tasks that we struggle, or we have resource issues, or we have gaps, but also to keep hold of all of our skilled machine translation engines, train them, because they're still going to be used for our instant translation offer, and to build an entire end-to-end workflow where we can control things from the writing through memoQ, through translation, through post-editing, and make sure our resources are used where the value is. And we can automate where there isn't as much value, but I still want to provide a service where I would not be able to provide that service before. I think with these tools, we can see a lot more work done that we wouldn't have been able to do in the past. And I think that's me. Thank you very much.